if you had the most valuable treasure in all of creation? Think about that for a minute. What might that be? Platinum, gold, Bitcoin, Dr. Pepper, whatever. The most valuable treasure in all of creation. Where would you put it? We might put it in a safe deposit box. We might put it in a safe at home. We might bury it in the backyard where nobody could find it. Where would you put the most valuable treasure? Paul says that God took that most valuable treasure in all of creation and he put it in clay pots. Look with me in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. We're going to begin at verse 7. I want us to consider together life as a clay pot. God has taken the most valuable treasure, the greatest thing that exists, ever has existed, ever will exist, the greatest treasure of all, and he has put it in clay pots. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning at verse 7, he says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay." Well, what treasure could he be talking about? If we were to back up a few verses, we'd see in verses 4 or verses 5 and 6, he says, what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. So in verse 5, he said, we're not here to talk about ourselves. We proclaim Jesus. Then he says in verse 6, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. He says, so the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has put his light in us. That light is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's the story. It's the truth that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The gospel is the story that God loved us before we could love ourselves. That God loved us enough not just to make life good for us and say, I love you, but to send his very own Son to die a death that we should have died but could not. Jesus died in order to pay the penalty for the sin of all who would receive him. That is amazing good news, because now those of us who deserve death for our sin can have life in him, and that life can be more abundant. That's incredible good news. This is the light for the world. And Paul says that God chose to take that light, that gospel, and hide it in our hearts. Now look at verse 7 again with that as the background. But we have this treasure in jars of clay. This great treasure, the gospel, the light to the dark world, has been put in something plain and ordinary as a clay pot. He says that God did this. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. So why would God take this awesome, incredible treasure of the gospel of Jesus Christ and put it in clay pots? Well, Paul says the first reason is to reveal the power of God. He said there, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. The power is not in the pot. That pot can hold life, but it cannot bring life. It can't cause life to happen, but it can hold something that is alive. When God chose to put his treasure in clay pots, he did so in order to reveal his own power. It's obvious that the pot has no power, so whatever power there is must be coming from what's inside. It must be coming from God. All right, so why are we talking about clay pots? Well, if we were to go back to Genesis, when God first created man, it says that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So what is man? What is human being? What is the human body? Primarily, it's just the same old elements that we find all over the rest of the world. We're basically dirt. If we take that image just a little bit farther, remember that God formed man from the dust of the earth, and then in the New Testament it says that Jesus, in the book of John, says that Jesus came to bring the water of life. And so when the water of life enters into that dirt, now we have water and dirt together, and we are made into a clay form. And in Jeremiah, God is called the potter. He can take that clay and form us into what he wants us to be. He chooses to use clay pots to hold his incredible treasure of the light for the darkness, that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. God doesn't use us in spite of our weakness. He uses us because of our weakness. You see, when all these challenges happen in life, as they do for all of us, there are those folks who will look at us and they'll say, man, how are you handling these things? I don't know how you're dealing with some of the stuff that you have to deal with. It sure ain't you, because you're not that smart. There's something going on inside of you. And it is then that they begin to recognize there's a power at work within the life of the believer. And so he says that he gave us this treasure in jars of clay to show the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. If we were perfect, everyone would see us instead of him. If we never made a mistake, we handled everything right, we had the perfect hair, stop. If we were perfect in every way, then people would say, that's one awesome dude. Look at that guy. He's incredible. And nobody would know about God. So he uses us in our imperfections, in our weaknesses. We're just normal, everyday folks, so that people see there's something more to us, and they begin to understand the power of God. In Paul's day, clay pots were not that dissimilar from what they are today. Now, they didn't look this fine and this refinished. They didn't look this finished and refined. But they were a lot like this in that they were very common. It's just water and dirt that you put over fire. So there was nothing special or spectacular about a clay pot in Paul's day. Just like today, very ordinary, very normal. Why does God use normal people? Let me take it a step further. Why does God use broken people? Because that's the only kind of people there are. And because in our brokenness, he can reveal his power. So Paul says this is the life of a clay pot. That in our weakness, in our normal, everyday, just regular lives as clay, God is able to reveal his power. But notice, not only did he put this awesome treasure of the gospel of Jesus Christ in clay pots to reveal his power, but he also did it to reveal the very presence of God, to show others that he is indeed with us. Since we're normal people, we have normal problems. Look at the text here in the next two verses, in verses 8 and 9. For we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. You hear the problems that everybody faces? The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. It happens to all of us. Look, he talks about being afflicted, being crushed, being perplexed, being persecuted, being struck down. We face all of these problems. Listen, Christianity does not put up a wall that protects us from the storms of life. Instead, Christianity, faith, is a foundation upon which we can stand when the storms come. The storms are still going to come, even if you follow Christ. Even though we are God's children, we're still going to face issues. But we have a foundation upon which we can stand that enables us to endure and survive and get through those times. John Henry Jowett told about a small village where an elderly woman died. She died without any money. She died uneducated. She was unsophisticated. But during her lifetime, her selfless service made a tremendous impact for Christ. And on her tombstone, they chiseled the words, "She did what she couldn't." She lived her life in a way that God's power and his presence were revealed in her life. She did what was not in her to do because God was there to do it through her. Paul is reminding us that when we live life as a clay pot, we hold that gospel, that light to the world, that we do so with the very presence of God within us. And it is that which strengthens us to make a difference. But we're weak, aren't we? We're fragile. This clay pot is easily broken. It's not hard. You don't have to apply much pressure. And it's shattered. But what if I took that very same clay pot and filled it with concrete all the way to the top? Then, if I were to step on it with the same amount of pressure, nothing would happen. The nature of the pot would not have changed at all. But the power and strength within the pot would be something completely different. And that power would be able to hold it all together. We have the power and the presence of God within us because he lives within us, because he gives us this awesome treasure of the gospel that we get to share with other people. Then we are not crushed. Did you see that in verses 8 and 9 when we looked at the problems? Look at also the blessings. Yeah, we're afflicted, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but we're not driven to despair. We're persecuted, but we're not forsaken. We're struck down, but we're not destroyed. Why? Because there's a strength within. There's a power and a presence that holds us together. Because the fragile clay pot, because that represents us, when we go through these difficulties, we can tell the world around us, there was a time when this would have broken me, but I'm holding it together because of the power in me. Let me share that power with you. Let me tell you about Christ so he can make that difference in your life as well. He gave us this treasure to reveal the power of God and to reveal the presence of God and to reveal the person of Christ. Look as we continue into the next few verses, verses 10 and 11. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. That word manifested means to be made obvious. So what he's saying in those two verses, I know it gets a little confusing, but what he's saying in those two verses is Jesus died. Why did Jesus die? Because he took on the form of a clay pot. Jesus, the Son of God, eternal from the past, eternal forevermore, the power of God, the Son of God, stepped out of that eternity, stepped away from the throne of glory, and took on the form of man. When he took on the form of man, he died. Why? Theologically, he died for us. Physically, he died because that's what humans do. We're fragile. We're clay. We die. And so Paul says, I'm carrying around that death. I live in this mortal, fallen, weak existence. He says in 11, we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. We die like he died. In that way, we connect to him. It tells people that he really became one of us. And when we experience that, we're able to tell them, but he brings real life. Yeah, we're going to die, but in Jesus we have real life. So he becomes manifest, obvious through us and in us. It's amazing that God would choose to use clay pots that are so easily broken. We think about all that God could do. He could have shared his gospel any way he wanted to. He could snap his fingers and just everybody is automatically people of faith and trust in him and live forever. And yet he chose to allow us to be a part of his work. He chose to put that treasure in us, that we might reveal his power and his presence and the very person of Jesus Christ through our lives. Paul said it in another way in Galatians. He said, I've been crucified with Christ. I have died to self. Now that I follow him, old dude is gone. He's made me something new. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So we represent, not only represent, but we make manifest, we show Christ at work in our lives. You know, we talked about putting the concrete in that clay pot. What if we just put a candle in there? Don't worry about the concrete. You got this clay pot and you put a candle in there. But this is an old clay pot, and this clay pot's been around a while, and over time it's got some little cracks in it. It's getting weaker and weaker as time goes, and so you can begin to see through those cracks. And with that candle burning on the inside, you see through the cracks, you can see the light on the inside. This is why he uses us. because we're weak, because we're fragile. It is in our weakness that His light shines and He becomes strong. Paul said that elsewhere in 2 Corinthians. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, calamities, lightning strikes. Oh, that's not that. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. In my weakness, that light that is come to the darkness can shine through. And people don't notice me. They notice what God's doing in me. And thereby they learn that He can do something for them as well. To God be the glory.